I don't know if you're into history, but what do these names have in common? Waterloo, Yorktown, Stalingrad. Any ideas? Battles. They are famous battles. And in fact, they're just very quick examples. There's many more. But actually, we won't understand our world today if we don't understand those battles. They help us understand different reasons why countries are like they are, like politics are like they are, like situations and relationships between countries are as they are, but if we understand these battles. And it's interesting because when we come to think about this morning our spiritual battle, we won't understand the world we're in unless we recognize that there is a spiritual battle going on. Unless we recognize there is a spiritual realm. Now, in this life, we need to remember and realize it's not just that all we can see that's important. There is a realm that we can't see, a spiritual realm that we must keep in mind. Not just the things we can see and touch that's important, but the Bible time and time again talks about this spiritual element. And we tend to think, well, I can't believe in that because I can't see it. But the Bible time and time again wants us to remember and wants us to see the reality is that there is evil around us. There is a darkness. There is evil and the devil, and there is a spiritual battle. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, come on, it's the 21st century. Can we really think about the devil and things like that? It's interesting. Many cultures around the world today have no problem at all thinking about evil. And thinking about this darker realm that there is, and a spiritual realm that there is. We're quite on our own in the Western society, not acknowledging it actually. But we need to remember and factor in, actually, if we believe in God, believing in the devil isn't that big a step, is it? And if you believe in God and if you believe in the devil, we need to be aware there is a depth of evil around that nothing else makes sense of except of an enemy. Maybe there's things that happen in the news. Maybe there's things you hear of that happen around and you think that is so dark. The only way that makes sense of that is if this spiritual realm and the darkness that we mentioned there is there. So the Bible teaches that the devil doesn't make us evil, but he does make fallen people worse. And there are things so dark, as I said, that it makes sense of this world when we remember the spiritual element to it. So as we come to think of this, I want us to have in mind the spiritual realm, the spiritual battle that there is going on. And as we come to the end of this first section of Joshua, so we'll stop here for the summer and pick it back up in September, we come to the end of their battle sequence. So at the end, as I said, the end of chapter 11, it says, and the land had rest from war. So after this, in one sense, the land was theirs. They'd kind of conquered the land. They were moving into this promised land that God had said they were going to have. And we're going to look at these final battles together. And as we look at them, it's going to help us to think about our spiritual battle. So I want us to see, well, what lessons can we learn from this chapter about our spiritual battle? And I think there's 5 reminders for us here, 5 things for us to see that will help us, I hope, in our spiritual battle to keep alert and to keep aware of what's happening around us, to keep in mind the spiritual realm that we need to battle against. So the first thing is this. The first thing we see is, as we come to thinking of our spiritual battle, remember your enemy. Remember your enemy. We see this in verses 1 to 5 and at the end of chapter 11, verses 21 to 23 as well. So verse 1 sounds very familiar to the last chapter that we looked at, because what happens here is we get all these different kings with weird and wonderful names coming together and saying, the Israelites are coming against us. They've beaten everybody in their path so far, so why don't we join up? Let's join forces, have this coalition, become this super army, and so we can stop them in their tracks. And listen to how they're described in verse 4. They came out with all their troops, a great horde in number, like the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. So here they were, with their high tech. That's what the horses and chariots were. That was the equivalent of the high tech. The equivalent today would be something like fighter jets or tanks, or drones. They had the best that you could get when it came to battles, these people. And they joined forces, so had the best, all joined together, and they were experienced people in battle, experienced in war. They had all these best things, and they were coming against the Israelites. Remember, the Israelites, even though they had conquered lots of the land so far, They were wanderers. They were people who were living in tents in the wilderness. They hadn't had a proper meal, as it were, for a while. They started to eat as they'd come into the land, but they'd been living off this bread from heaven. So they would have been weak. They would have been struggling. They wouldn't have had any of this high-tech stuff. Can you imagine being in a battle today where you're against all this high-tech things, and that's all you've got is maybe a few sticks? And you're kind of tired and you're weary, and you think, oh, how am I going to fight against them? It looked like a really impossible situation. But here here is the enemy. And they were big and they were scary. That's what we are to get in these first 4 verses. And not only that, at the end of the passage, in chapter 20, verse 21, down to the end there, we see that we meet the Anakim. Do you see that there? Joshua came to the time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. Now, what's the significance there? Well, these Anakim were famed for being massive. They were giants. Yeah. So when you think back to earlier in the Bible, in Numbers, before they conquered the Promised Land, remember Joshua went in with some spies to spy out the land, and they came back and they said, "We haven't got a chance. These guys are massive." Yeah. And they came back and they said, and they were the Anakim. So right at the end, we see these massive giants as well, who again they thought, "We haven't got a chance." If you ever played sport growing up, I remember playing when I was playing football. There were some teams, and the boys just seemed to, I don't know what they fed them. And you see it today when helping with Thomas's football. Some of the teams turn up and you think, I think they drove here. They look about 17, playing against other 13-year-olds. Some are down here, some are like towering over them. I think they're giants, we haven't got a chance. Well, the kind of feeling we should have reading this is massive. These enemies are big and they're scary. And so before going any further, the first thing we need to do in our kind of battle plan, as we think spiritually of fighting against the enemy, is to acknowledge that we have an enemy. Acknowledge we have an enemy. Someone who hates you. If you're a Christian, the devil hates you. If you're not yet a Christian and you're searching, the devil does not want you to be here. He doesn't want you to be getting to know who Jesus is. Yes, that's right. And there is a spiritual realm that we need to fight against and be aware of. Satan hates Christians. He hates the church. He hates Christian families. He hates anybody exploring Christianity. All of that Satan hates. And there is real evil. But here's the problem. We forget. We forget we've got an enemy. This is how Romans 13 puts it. Beside this, you know the time and the hour that has come for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night's far gone, the day's at hand. So then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armour of light. The idea there is you've been lulled into this sleep and you've forgotten we're in a time of war. There is a mindset, isn't there? If you're in a time of war, if you're in a battle, on a battlefield, there is a mindset to that than if you're on holiday. I'm sure there was a different feel to being in the trenches to being on the beaches on a holiday. Yeah, there's a mindset of I need to be alert, aware. There's an enemy. He's real. So we need to acknowledge there is an enemy and acknowledge that his power is real. I wonder if you need to wake up to the battle. Because elsewhere in the Bible, the devil is described as a lion, kind of prowling around, waiting to devour, like ready to pounce. And he knows you. He knows your weaknesses. He knows where you struggle, and he is ready to pounce. Ephesians 2 describes the devil as the prince of the power of the air. If we're not serving Jesus, if we're not slave to him, if we're not yoked to him, effectively we're yoked to Satan. He's our master. That's the reality. So he's real, and he has a power. We're going to see he's not the ultimate power, but let's stop and acknowledge and remember that. Maybe you've been sleeping and forgotten you're in a battle when we are. Wonder how different would your life look tomorrow or this afternoon if you remember there's a spiritual realm. There's a spiritual battle that I need to be aware of. I wonder if you're not a Christian here this morning, have you acknowledged that? Have you acknowledged that there is a spiritual element about this world? Maybe you're wondering about it. Maybe you're thinking about the darkness and the light and you're wondering have those kind of questions. See, this makes more sense of who you are and what's going on around us than any other explanation. Maybe there's something as we think of these enemies. And you think of the Anakim, these giants. Maybe there's something in your life that feels like this just massive, unbreakable thing. It's big, it overshadows you. Maybe a sin or temptation that you struggle with. Maybe an attitude or your past. And it just seems like a shadow over you all the time. You think there's no chance. Let's retreat. Let's give up. Maybe it seems unstoppable. The first part of our battle plan needs to be remember your enemy. Remember we've got an enemy. Remember there is a spiritual battle in the first place. And let's be open about that. Let's be real about that. That's the first thing. Remember your enemy. The second thing is remember your God. We must never stop there. It'd be hopeless and we just got these terrible giants and these fearful enemies. But there's more. Look where we go in chapter 11, verse 6 to 15. We see this. So 1 to 5 lays it on thick. They're massive. They've got all this high-tech gear, and it's looking really scary. But look what God says in verse 6. And the Lord said to Joshua, and remember we have heard this a few times now, do not be afraid of them. For tomorrow at this time I will give them over all of them, slain to Israel. Say, don't be afraid. You're going to win. I've given you this battle again. Don't be afraid. Isn't it lovely again? Joshua was told in chapter 1, don't be afraid. And God doesn't say, I've told you once. I'm not telling you again. Don't be afraid. I've given the battle. No, he knows. He sees Joshua's fear. Maybe he sees him looking up at these enemies, seeing their horses and their chariots. And he comes to him again and says, don't fear. Isn't it wonderful God's patient with us like that? Maybe you think God has lost his patience with me. I've failed him so many times. Or I'm struggling with the same thing. Or I've got this fear again that God again comes to you this morning. He says, don't fear. Don't fear. I know. Keep going. Keep going. But here he is. He comes and says, don't be afraid. I'm going to give them over to you. The battle is mine. I'll defeat them. Trust me. And it's really important to get this. The only reason God's people could win in these battles was because God was with them. If you look at any battles they try and do without God or without consulting God, they lose. They haven't got the ability to do it without him because of what was going on here and why these battles were taking place. And I think it's good just to pause again because this passage brings it to light and shows it again. And as we're reading through, maybe we're getting a bit uncomfortable, as we might do with some of these passages, thinking, how can God command for people to be killed? Yeah, can you see that as you read? God's people are coming into this land where the nations already are. How can God command for them to be killed like that? We can sometimes think, make God sound like kind of a gunman going into a place where there's loads of innocent people, maybe a school, and he's the gunman killing people. And we can think it sounds evil, and we don't like it. Well, let's remember again, I know I've explained this before, but just maybe you might have missed this, and I don't want to miss a chance to explain again. Remember who the Canaanites were, the people who they were coming in to take over. These were people who were taking part in phenomenally wicked and dark acts. They were sacrificing children, was one of the things they were doing, throwing them into the fire. And this was done just to appease their gods. And God was saying, no, you do not treat weak and vulnerable children like that. God saw it and it made him angry. And in fact, it wasn't just God turning up out of the blue. We're told about these people back in Genesis. And so it's about 500 years that God waits and gives them a chance to come. Some people we do see turn to God and plead for mercy. And they're saved, they're rescued. And so 500 years of waiting. Not only that, remember they walked around Jericho for a week. That gave them a chance for the people to turn. It says in this passage, doesn't it, that in chapter 11, verse 19, there was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel, showing that there was a chance. We met the Gibeonites, remember, they did it in a bit of a strange way, but they did find peace. They came and they sought God's mercy and they found it. See, God is patient. 500 years of saying, of giving them a chance to turn. But God, this is why God was using Israel and saying, look, you're going to go in as my instruments of judgment because the time has come. See, that what was happening in Canaan and the Canaanites was so abhorrent to God that he had to deal with it. So God isn't the shooter going into this place kind of shooting people. The evil is already happening. God is going in as the person to rescue the world from this evil. He's like the police going in and killing the shooter to protect from the danger and the aftermath that could be happening and these atrocities. See, in years to come, what happens to Israel? It's not just because Israel were this perfect nation that were kind of deserving of use. No. God was using them in this way. In years to come, Israel would disobey God. He'd keep warning them, but they would disobey. And what does God do to them in the land? Well, he takes them out. He lets another nation come in and take them over. He vomited out of the land, the Bible describes it as. Because they weren't faithful. They didn't trust God. They went their own way. But you see, the point is here, there is a battle going on, and God's power is what is making this battle possible. It's his power and it's his honour. And so when they were in line with his will, suddenly the enemies were defeated. Now, if you're a Christian, there's a great truth and a great reminder to us here. If God is on your side, if you're keeping in step with the Spirit as it were, following his ways, we can know the power of God to say no to the struggles that we have, to say no to the sin that is so easily entangles us. And our God is greater than our enemy, more powerful than him. And we see that at the cross ultimately, don't we? Where Jesus died and took the enemy of death and Satan and sin to the grave with him, left them there as it were and conquered the grave. He is better, he is bigger, he is stronger than all those things. And then you think of chapter 11 verse 21, these Anakim, these great giants. Isn't it lovely how the end of the battles kind of finish off with those one that in Numbers they said we got no chance. And it kind of brings us off in this wonderful close to say, yeah, and even those giants, God helped us defeat. We beat those as well. See, the point is here that God is bigger than our enemy. He's more powerful. And when we are with him, he is on our side, we can know victory. So as we apply that for our lives, there's a God who, God is there for us and he wants us to battle with his power, with his strength, following his ways. His power is with you. We don't have to give up. We can be encouraged in our battle to fight with the strength that God gives, as we'll see in a moment. But let's ask that question. What is there that seems like that giant to you, that is overshadowing you, that you think, no way, and it's just plagued you for years? What enemies are you facing? You feel defeated. Let's remember today, we've got God on our side, the one who has defeated our greatest enemy. The power of sin and darkness and death is gone. And there is hope for you in that. You don't have to stay defeated, but actually God can say, yes, I can help you. I can strengthen you. And this is what we see in the Bible. We might feel weak, we might feel at the end of ourselves, but God uses the weak like Israel against the powers that seem so impressive. He says, I use the weak. I use a church that seems small, a church that seems like it's struggling. I can use a weak church for my glory because it's me. It's all about his glory, his honor. So there is hope today. If you feel weak, have you come to the end of yourself, call out to him. Call out to the God who will never let you down. And he loves to use weak, foolish things for his glory. That's how he works. So remember your enemy, remember your God, and we're going to pick up the pace a bit more now. Remember your role. Remember your role. Verses 6 to 15. Now God promises, look, Joshua, these enemies, I'm going to give them over to you. I'm going to help you to defeat them. And so it's interesting, isn't it? What does Joshua do then? Does he say, I'll just sit back then. If God's going to do it, I'll let him do it. No, he gets involved, doesn't he? And we see this throughout. Joshua is told by God, I'm going to give them into your hand. But it doesn't mean he's just passive. Actually, he has to kind of roll his sleeves up. He has to get to work. He has to battle in these wars. Even in verse 7, he says he kind of comes up with some battle plans, some tactics in order to defeat them, and thinking of high and low land, things like that. He uses that because God uses that as part of his victory. So God being with him and promising him victory didn't mean that Joshua did nothing. No, he was involved. And verses 8 and 9, we see there a strange part. You might have thought, what's going on there? He says, the Lord says to hamstring the horses, that is to cut a tendon on their legs, and to get rid of the chariots. So why does he do that? Well, it means these horses now can't be used in battle anymore. That's the idea. They're not as strong. They don't have that pace that they would have had if they had these hamstrings or these tendons in place. And the chariots couldn't be used because they'd been burned. Why? Well, because God knew that this is what the temptation would be. They beat this army, and suddenly they've got all this amazing tech. Then they think of other battles. Hey, don't worry about the battle. Look at what we've got. We've got these drones. We've got these tanks. We can beat anybody now. And God says, no. That's not what this is about. Remember, it's my battle. So get rid of those things. I don't want you to depend on them. I want you to depend on me. Which is why in Psalm 20 it says, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. That's the idea. Don't trust in those things. It's not about that. It's about trusting in me, relying on me. It's my battle. God wanted to make sure that they knew they relied on him. So what does this mean for us? Well, in our lives, as we face our battle, God is greater than our enemy. He has defeated Satan and sin and death. And he promises us, if we're in Christ, the victory over those things. But that doesn't mean we just do nothing. That doesn't mean we just sit back and expect everything to just go away, all the struggles to stop. No, we remember we're in this battle and God has promised to give us victory, and so we fight. Remember I said earlier the devil prowls around like a roaring lion. He knows he's waiting for us to kind of be on our own, as it were. You know, think of how a lion would attack a zebra or something like that. Wait for it to be on its own, away from the other zebras, and he would get it as in its weakest point. See, Satan knows your weaknesses, and you do too. If you were to write a plan for Satan on how to take you down, how to drag you away from Jesus, what would be on that list? How would he do it? If you know it, Satan knows it. And so what have you put in place to think, well, if that's my weakness, if that time of day or that time of the year or that area, that's where I struggle, what am I doing in my battle to fight those things? Where do you need to wage war in your life? Where are you vulnerable? Where do you need to pray? Lord, pray into daily or throughout the day. Put reminders on your phone to say, pray into this. Verses that we need to memorize to try and help us in our struggles that we might have. Who are you asking to pray for you in those situations? You see, what's your battle plan when it comes to this? Remember your role. It's not just sit back and let God do it all. God has promised us the victory, and so we walk in it. And we say, Lord, help me to do this in your strength. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says this, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that was in me. Can you see the balance there? God's grace. It's all about his grace, but I worked hard. I had to roll my sleeves up. Or Philippians 2, Paul says again, live out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it's God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Can you see that balance? We have to fight, but God will strengthen us all the way. It's a bit like if you imagine a sailor on a boat, and he's just lying there thinking, when's this boat going to move? The wind's blowing all around, and right next to him is the sail just lying on the boat. I don't know how these things work, but you can imagine. There it's just lying, or it's not kind of out. It's like, well, the wind is coming, so get the sail out. You need to put some effort in, and then you can soar. Then you can go and catch that wind. Well, as it were, the wind of God's Spirit is there. And we say, Lord, help me. Let me put my sails up in the right place so you can strengthen me to go. Maybe today you feel down and out in the battle. When was the last time that you really fought? When it was hard? When you prayed? And when you asked others to pray? See, have we lost sight of that together? What do you need to put in place to help you to dependently fight? God's promised us the victory in that. So let's trust in him. So we've looked at those first three things. Remember your enemy, remember God, remember your role. The last two things are very quick, but there's a quick interlude I want us to do as well, because there's a verse here that we need to deal with. And I want to challenge you to choose your team. In this battle, choose your team. Look at verses 16 to 20. There's some tough verses there, especially verse 20. Let me read it to you. It says, for it is the Lord's doing to harden their hearts that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destruction and should receive no mercy but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, they're hard verses, aren't they? God hardened their hearts. It makes it sound like this. They didn't have a choice. If God hardened their hearts and they couldn't receive mercy, what's going on? Well, again, let's remember the context. Because God has given 500 plus years for these nations to seek forgiveness and mercy. 500 plus years. They'd heard about Israelites and their God. That's why they'd made this coalition plan. They'd heard that the Gibeonites had found mercy. They'd heard that maybe Rahab and her family had fled and found forgiveness and peace with God. They'd had many opportunities to come, but this is the point where their hearts are hardened. And what happens? God gives them what they want. That's what God hardening of hearts is. God says, if that's what you choose, that's what I'll give. We see this in Pharaoh in Exodus. Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and then God hardened his heart as well. And you're like, well, which is it? Well, it's both, isn't it? Pharaoh was saying no, and so God hardened his heart. Notice, it isn't God takes soft hearts and hardens them, but he takes hearts that are already hard, and he further hardens them as kind of his judgment. He gives them what they choose. And we see this so many times in the Bible. Part of God's judgment is he gives us what we want. And that is a terrifying place to be. In Romans 1, he says he hands us over to our desires. Oh, if that's what you want, have it. If you don't want me, don't have me. He gives us that dignity, as it were, of that choice. And why I wanted to stop here was to ask, whose side are you on? Are you with Jesus or are you not? And I want to urge you not to put it off. You think, I'll trust Jesus tomorrow. I'll do it in a few years. Just got a few other things I want to get done first, then I'll deal with it. But we just don't know how long we've got. And one of the lies of Satan is, put it off. Put it off. And eventually God gives us what we want. If you don't want me, don't have me. So my challenge for you today from this passage is, don't harden your heart today. Say yes to Jesus. He's given you another opportunity. You know as well as I do just how suddenly somebody's life can be taken away. You haven't got tomorrow promised you. Today's the day. Turn to him right now. We might think, I can put it off. No, come now. So choose your side. That's what I wanted to do just before these two last brief points. Choose your team. Please choose Jesus. He's coming to you again today to say, trust in me, and I'll save you. So the last two things are this. So we've looked at remember your enemy, remember your God, remember your role. This is our battle plan and our spiritual battle. Fourth thing is remember to keep going. Now, what do I mean here? Well, in verse 18, there's just a good reminder, because we read through these battles. It takes like 4 or 5 minutes to read these battles. If you read all these chapters, it might take us 15 minutes. And you think, Joshua kind of went into land. One day battled Ai, one day's Jericho, and did all this, and suddenly, a few days later, they've got the land. But there's a reminder in verse 18 that says, look, Joshua made war for a long time. This wasn't an overnight thing. And if you do the maths on some of the dates that were given, it was probably between 5 and 7 years that these battles took, these chapters that we've looked at. Years of battling, years of planning, years of sleepless nights. All happened, and it was a battle, it was a fight. Now, in our spiritual battle, we need to remember this. There are some moments where God gives victory, and it seems like we take leaps and bounds forward. It seems like we used to struggle with something, and suddenly, I'm just not struggling with that anymore. Amazing. But there's other things that we battle with daily, and might even battle till the day we die, till the day we go to glory, where there will be no more sin. So we have to keep on going. That's the encouragement for us. Keep going. We do have to sometimes be like William Carey said, I can slog. Yeah, and we just kind of plod. I can plod. It's just a slog. We plod along. One preacher describes us, it's a long obedience in the same direction. It's helpful, isn't it? A long obedience in the same direction. It's hard. And it's slow sometimes. And we don't seem to be getting anywhere. But God is working in us. He is transforming us day by day. That's why we need other Christians to know us and say, I've seen a real change in you here. There's been real growth here, because we can't see it. We think we're getting nowhere. But God can see. God can help us to see growth in other people that they can't see themselves. So encourage each other. Let's encourage each other in our battle. And as Hebrews 12 says, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin that clings closely, and let us run with endurance the race set before us. Keep going. Keep going. Remember your enemy. Remember your God. Remember your role. Remember to keep going. And the last thing is, remember God's faithfulness. And this is where I just wanted to mention in closing this list of names in chapter 12. And you think, why do we bother having these names? Because, we're not going to read. Are we going to read through them all? What is going on here? But you see what these are? These are testaments of God's victory and his kindness and his grace to God's people. God has done this. He helped us in that battle. Yes, and this is just a list of things to be thankful for. When we are in the battle, we need to remember ways which God has helped us in the past, because we'll forget. I'm sure there are things that you've thought, There are times where God has helped you through a particular period and you think, I'll never forget this. But you have. God will always be as real to me now as he is right now. I'll never forget this moment. But we do. And so we need to have ways to remember. Count your many blessings. Name them one by one. And it'll surprise you what the Lord has done. That's the idea here. That's what chapter 12 is telling us. Write down. Is there a way that you log God's answers to prayer? Is there a way that you can listen to how God's answering prayer in other people's lives? As we come together to pray as a church, we hear points for prayer. And then the next week when we meet together, we hear how God has answered those prayers. So we need to do it as a church. We might have some things that we remember God has done for us individually. We thank him. We do it as a church. But as well, we do it internationally. We want to hear what's going on World Mission, how God has answered prayer over here, and he's doing that over there. We praise God for that, and he's working through that. We do it historically. Look at what God's done in church history, how he's revived nations from nowhere. We remember God has done that in the past. We look at the Bible, what he's done there. Can you see there's time and time again God's faithfulness? And it fuels our strength. It fuels us to keep going and trust in our battle today. How do we keep remembering? We need to put things in place in our lives to not forget. It's one of the reasons we've got communion this afternoon, so we don't forget the gospel. Jesus came into this world, lived the perfect life for people who didn't care for him, as we'll think about later on. He gave his life so we could be forgiven. He rose again to offer us peace now and forever. We're on our way to glory with him. He won't leave us down. He'll always be with us. And we forget those things. We've been forgiven for our past, present, future sins if we're trusting in Jesus. And we forget. So come this afternoon as we remember. Don't forget this. We need this. We need to be reminded. And God knows we forget. That's why he says, do this in remembrance of me. Don't forget the cross. I wonder, have you taken your eyes off Jesus? Have you forgotten God's faithfulness? Let's remember together as we just finish the cross of Jesus, where he gave everything for us. As he won in the battle, we now stand in Christ, in his armour, as Ephesians 6 puts it. The battle has been won. We stand in his strength, not on our own. And he says, let me help you into this battle. As we face this battle this week, we're on the side of King Jesus, the victorious one, the greater Joshua. Let's keep our eyes on him. And let me encourage you as we close. If you haven't chosen the side yet, choose Jesus today. Don't put it off. Remember your enemy. Remember your God. Remember your role. Remember to keep going. And let's never forget God's faithfulness.